Yes, so week 5. So far we have been particularly looking at what we've been calling creating a fit mind. When we say mind, of course, we don't mean like our brain. It's like a fit state of being. So that's what we've been, well, not just looking at, but we've actually been doing through our practices that we've all been engaging in. We've been looking at integration, and perhaps one way you could sum up integration is taking responsibility, seeing that we are an agent in our own lives, sort of working against that kind of natural instinct to blame, especially when difficult things happen. So easy, isn't it? So quick, that instinct to blame. So sort of embarrassing, really, when you find out that, I don't know how many times you've done this, you've kind of thought in your house or flat or everything, like, who did that? And then you'd realise, oh, it was me, actually. Do you know that? Just the instinct is particularly on something painful, is to find whose fault was it? Yeah, we want to blame. So we're working against that tendency to actually, own and take responsibility for our own states of mind, not blaming ourselves either, and really starting to see that if we can change ourselves in that way, then we do change the world. We change our bit of the world, but in a sense, what else is there? So by really changing ourselves, we immediately change the world. That's integration, and on the basis of that, we can act positively. I was very, very interested in our little group. We were talking about the homework of being more of a friend. And 2 people in the little group I was in hadn't been here last week, so they hadn't been given the literal homework, but actually each of them had just done the homework intuitively. I thought it was very, very interesting that on the basis of integration, positive emotion will naturally follow. We'll naturally want to reach out to other people. So the 2 in our group, without even being given the homework, had naturally done the homework, and they had naturally found themselves reaching out to friends. So on the basis of integration, we act positively. And I really liked it last week when Maitreya Bandha said, if one of these things I've heard like many times, but hundreds of times even, but just to be reminded of it, that the best way to protect your mind is to act positively. Instead of sort of fretting over what you might perceive as the less positive things in your own mind, you can kind of go in a sort of receding circle, sort of fretting over that, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm anxious, and then you can get anxious about being anxious, or with me it's irritation, I can feel irritable, but then I can get irritated with myself for being irritable, so it just ends up in it just perpetuates. So actually, a much more creative thing to do is just to do something positive, just help someone, like Francesca was saying, just actually, even if you're feeling quite low yourself, you can always be a friend. It's always possible to be friendly, actually. Actually, I remember a little story about my own teacher, Sangharajta. He was at a conference with some other leading Buddhists many years ago, and someone asked the panel, as it were, what's the hallmark of a Buddhist? What's this kind of most telling thing about being a Buddhist? And one of the senior Buddhist monks said, someone who's a Buddhist is always happy. And my own teacher, Sangharajta, he said, sort of, I beg to differ. I'm sure he said it very politely, but he said, I don't quite agree with that. He said, I think that the hallmark of a Buddhist would be to be friendly, because you can't always be happy, but you can always be friendly. Because friendliness is, it's an action, it's not a feeling, So you can always be friendly. So you can, and that's the best way to protect your mind, just to be friendly, just to do some small act of generosity, kindness. So we looked at that. We've been looking at that over the weeks. And then last week we particularly looked at how context creates consciousness. That's the external aspect of positive emotion. That we'll be like, we are creatures who are influenced, and sort of we may as well admit that to ourselves. If we practice like this for years and years and years, at the stage of being a Buddha, a Buddha would be positive no matter what circumstances they were in. An enlightened being would always be creative, would always be friendly. But while we're not enlightened, we're going to be very, very influenced and affected by the company we keep. As Maitreya Bandha said last week, very few of us will rise above the circumstances that we're in. So the art is just to be intelligently aware of that, and just to then, as much as we can, put ourselves in circumstances that will be conducive to being positive. And that particularly means look at the company of people that we keep. That's why we have a centre, that's why we have these nights where we practice all together. We could all, sit at home and learn all these things on YouTube, I'm sure, but we come together in order to, because we recognise that we will affect each other. So that's the external aspect of positive emotion. Give ourselves a positive context as much as we can. And actually by doing that, we then create a positive context for each other. Again, that's why we emphasise retreats, for example, so much, because both is happening. We're being influenced by the context we're in on retreat, or here, on a Wednesday night like this, but we're also being part of creating the context for each other. So consciousness is being created by context, and it's also creating context, yeah? So you can create this positive feedback loop. So that's just a little recap of some of the things we've been looking at so far. And then this week, this week's a sort of gear change, really. This week, the whole course is hopefully going on to a new level, where what we're starting to do from this week onwards is to start to see that actually is much more than ordinary happiness. So far, we've been looking at how to create a happy, healthy human mind, yeah? That's great, and in a way that's a lifetime's work in itself. If we become, what did Shraddha Siddhi say in the announcement, that kind of, we sort of earn, if you like, being a human being. We become happy, healthy human beings. We sort of become more and more into our birthright of being happy, healthy human beings. That's great, and that's just the start. According to Buddhist teachings, that's just the start. There's much, much more to this human life even than that. And that's what we're going to be, that's where the course is going to be taking us in the next 4 weeks. So it's we're definitely upping the ante in these next 4 weeks. So one thing I'm really going to encourage you to do is really read the book. I'm sure many of you have already. But if you haven't, start reading it. If you're a bit behind, don't worry. Just go on to week 5. Yeah, just kind of. You can always at the end of the course go back over the stuff you've missed, but try and keep up with each week. The ideal, if you're a bit ahead, try and read each week before you come, then that'll be even better. That's what some people in the team have said they were doing. But if not, at least keep up with it. So if you're a bit behind, don't worry, but just go home this week and read week 5, yeah, so that you're sort of on top of it, as it were. If you are ahead, go on to week 6. So this is, I know we haven't really been using this word Buddhism. It's got its own kind of problems, if you like, because it does suggest that it's an ism. But if I can use that word for a bit, what we're going to do from now on is what makes Buddhism Buddhism. So this really, what the subject material from this week onwards is what defines Buddhism. What makes it more than, just something. Makes it more than just something that gets us to be calmer and gets us to be happier. It does do that, but there's much, much more. So that's by way of preamble. So what I want to teach you this week is something, sounds terribly ambitious when I say it, but something about the very patterning of life itself, the very patterning of life itself. So the Buddha's discovery was that life is patterned by a set of natural laws. And it's a little bit technical, this first bit, but it's worth it. It's not actually that technical. But life is patterned by a set of natural laws, and the Buddhist word for this is niyama. So I've written that up on the top of the board there. This is all in the book, so you can, sometimes it helps to make notes, but it's all in the book. So and there's 5 of these natural laws. So first of all, I'm going to look at the first 3. So the first one is called the Utu Niyama. So that's all the laws of physics, basically. That's laws like the law of gravity, the law of thermodynamics. That's the law that Newton discovered, didn't invent, but discovered. That's very, very important, that these laws aren't inventions. So Newton discovered the law of gravity, famously sitting under a tree, the apple fell on his head, and he realised this was a law of gravity. So all those laws, I'm suffering from the law of thermodynamics at the moment. I live in a Buddhist community, actually. There's 12 of us live there, and my room's on the ground floor. It's quite next to the bathroom, so hot weather, people like to keep the window open. Of course, that makes the door slam. So I thought, well, there you go, the law of thermodynamics, window open, door slams. So that Utu Niyama is all those laws of physics that govern the whole kind of mineral kingdom. And then the next law is the bija niyama. So, bija, the word bija means seed, actually, in Pali. This is the law of all. It's all the biological laws, all the laws of biology, botany. I don't know very much about these laws, but I know that somehow, I'm sure some of you are botanists of biology, that plants do something and they grow, but they do something, don't they, with oxygen and carbon dioxide in it. So all those, photosynthesis, isn't it? So that's all those laws that some of you, I'm sure, are more knowledgeable than me. I do know a little bit more about physics, so I've forgotten it. So that's all those laws. So again, completely natural. And we discover more and more. Humans can discover more about these laws, but they're not invented, they're discovered, And then you've got the Mano Niyama. So that's all the laws of instinct. It can be very complex. It can go from simple to complex, the Mano Niyama. So it's sort of instinct and perception. It's kind of what is it? It covers some action, but it's non-volitional action. So it covers the way, for example, you might blush when you feel embarrassed. It's that's a non-volitional action. You can't help it. You wish you could, but you can't. Or that your mouth might water if you smell something tasty. And they can be quite complex, all the laws of when birds migrate and how they know, those amazing things in nature when you watch David Attenborough, and somehow those fish, the salmon, they do this amazing thing, don't they? They go off and then they somehow find their way back to the very same, not just the same river, but the same bit of river, and all those amazing things are all covered by this mano-neema. And things about ourselves are covered by that. It's but they're not volitional. It's instinct. It's instinct and perception. So these are all natural. They were not invented. They're not ways of thinking. It's just the sort of patterning of the natural world. So that's the first three. The first three of them, and it's as well to know about them, especially the mano-neema. We can't change the mano-neema, but it's as well. But we can learn about it. We can take it into account in terms of ourselves. Yeah, we can take it into account. But the two next ones are the ones that are particularly important to us. And that is the karma-neema and the dharma-neema. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about both of these. And this is going to be the stuff of our next explorations. We already actually have been exploring the karma-neema, although we may not have given it that name all along. So the karma-neema, for a start, only comes into play where there's reflexive consciousness. So it only really comes into play in the human realm. It only comes into play where we're not just aware, but we're aware that we're aware. Yeah. So it's the realm. It comes into. So as far as I know, animals don't have that, or they might just have it a little tiny bit. Yeah. But human beings have this reflexive consciousness, and the law of karma, it governs the relationship between our actions and the effects of our actions. And when I say action, I'm including mind. So in Buddhism, we talk about actions of body, speech, and mind. Yeah, so our mind is an action. What we habitually think about, or where we habitually place our mind, has an effect. So that's what the law of karma means. It's worth spending a little bit of time on this, because I think it's quite a misunderstood word and notion. This word karma, it's entered our vocabulary, hasn't it, in the English language, in quite unhelpful and even incorrect ways. So people might say things like, "That's my karma," or something, or "That's your karma." But karma in Buddhism, it certainly doesn't mean a system of punishment and reward, for example. It definitely doesn't mean that. It simply means volitional action. But what Buddhism does say is that our volitional actions will have an effect. If we act in ways that are based on kindness and generosity, that will have a positive effect. On other people probably, but certainly on ourselves. And if we act in ways that, if we act out of sort of greed or selfishness, will certainly affect on other people, but it'll also have an effect on ourselves. It'll have an effect on ourselves in the moment, but it'll make it more likely that we'll act in those ways in the future. Yeah, whichever way. So if we act kindly one time, it will make it more likely that we do that the next time. Like, who was it? Was it you who was talking about telling people you loved them? Who was saying that about? I've lost you now. Who was telling people they loved them? It was you. Yeah, and you were saying So it was interesting, wasn't it? Because you said the first few times it was difficult, but then actually it becomes easier. It becomes so. It's like it's like you've created a channel where that can flow more easily. So by acting in a way that's positive, it's more likely that you'll do that. It becomes more natural. You can see that the opposite's true. That if you habitually indulge in, for myself, kind of irritation, replaying arguments in my mind, then it's more likely that I'll continue doing that. So in a way, this is, without sort of naming it as such, this is what we've been exploring on the course so far, how our actions of body, speech and mind affect us one way or the other. So it's like karma. The law of karma is the law of positive growth. It's the law that allows us to grow. If that wasn't, if the universe wasn't patterned in that way, then growth wouldn't be possible. Human growth wouldn't be possible. Growth as a being wouldn't be possible. So I'm going to just pause there because, as I say, it's quite a misunderstood notion, this law of karma. So I want to see if there's any questions about it or clarifications needed about this law of karma. Yes.
So is it? Sorry if I'm
that's fine.
repeating, but it's about what you give out and receive in this life. When I'm talking about,
You're not talking about a future life.
yeah.
Well, what's behind your question, or?
I'm just trying to get it clear for myself. As far as I tend to understand it, it's really what I give out and receive in general, to people, to the world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously we kind of have those phrases, bad karma man or whatever.
Yeah.
And, I realise in the sort of Buddhist notion of rebirth, it can be in the next life. Is that correct?
Yes, and I probably won't take it into that in this discussion. So the Buddha would certainly have believed in rebirth, which isn't the same as reincarnation. It's more subtle than that. But I think for the purposes of understanding, we'll just in a certain sense you can use the notion of rebirth metaphorically as well. That in each moment we're being reborn, and how we're reborn each moment will depend on how we've acted in the previous moment. Yeah? So that's a way to look at it. Yeah? Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So I guess I'm just reflecting on this. I think in the past I've thought of karma as a kind of like moral thing, like if you do something bad, then you get punished for it.
Yeah.
It's quite maybe. And actually, what we've been doing on the course is practicing changing our habitual behaviours and seeing and reflecting on the effects of them. And actually, what we're talking about is the reality, like getting familiar with the, through practice and observation of like the tangible nature of the effect of sort of positive motivation.
That's exactly it, and we're seeing for ourselves. So there's no punishment and reward because there's no body or no thing to give that. Like even a Buddha can't give out punishment and reward. Yeah. But it's easy to slip into that. I think it's worth reminding ourselves that it's not about punishment and reward. Like I was saying the other week, that's why we don't talk about notions of absolute good and bad in Buddhism. But we see for ourselves, we're testing for ourselves, if I act in a way, on the basis of friendliness, kindness, then what is the consequence of that on others, but also on myself? Yeah? Yeah. Yes, another question?
So, can you say that karma is the law of cause and effect? So if you do a certain thing, you know there's a certain effect that's going to happen within this lifetime.
Well, I don't want to say no, but I don't want to say yes exactly. Because cause and effect could be a bit too linear because maybe to think of it more like a sort of patterning is better, because you have got the law of karma, but you've got all these other laws as well. So we haven't got on to Dharma yet, but you've got these 4 laws all working together. So why that's important is to remember is that you can't say that anything that happens to you or anyone else, you can't exactly say where it came from. It could be any one of these laws or a mixture of these. So that's why I'd shy away a bit from cause and effect, because it could be, it's not quite so linear as that. That's why I'd shy away from it. At the same time, cause and effect is good in a sense because it shows that it's natural. There's no outside agent. So, for example, a typical example I might always use often use is if I've got a stomach ache, it could be one of any of these 4. Like it could be because I don't know, I've knocked myself against, I've walked into the corner of the table or something like that. I've hurt myself. That would be the first law, yeah? That would be a physical cause. It could be because I've eaten something that disagreed with me. Then that's a kind of more the laws of biology, if I've eaten a bad meal or something. It could be because I'm feeling very nervous about something. I'm tense because I'm about to give a speech or something, at a wedding or something. And then that's the more sort of psychological, but it's having the physical effect. It could be because I'm feeling uneasy in my conscience, because I've acted in a way that, I haven't lived up to my sort of how I would wish to act. So I might feel, sometimes I do feel that more and more. I think it's quite a positive sign if we feel this. I could just be feeling physically uneasy, unhappy with this way that I've acted, and I need to make amends in some way. So it could be one of those 4. So, or it could be a mixture. And also, it's difficult to completely tell. It's difficult to completely tell for ourselves. It's certainly impossible to tell in relation to someone else or an individual or a group of people. You can't tell. So that's why you don't want to use this notion of karma crudely. Just because someone's suffering doesn't mean that they've done something unkind or something. It could be something completely different. So that's quite important to know about. Yeah? Does that sort of help, just this notion of patterning? Yes, Alexander.
But then does that, when that law of karma kind of go back to us in a positive or negative way, does that usually, like, I want to talk about level, like, is so it's quite hard to describe, but the level of action that we do in terms of importance, like, does that come back to us usually, like, stronger or lower, and how is there any way to know that it's not like physical, biological instinct, that that's from the karma? And I don't know, it's quite hard to put word on what I'm thinking right now. That's not making
Is there any way to know? There probably isn't a way to directly know, but in terms of and what I would say is, in a certain sense, don't even worry about it. Don't even worry about, more concern yourself with what you're creating for the future. So in a way, we find ourselves how we are now. Like, we're just here, because of a result of all these things, or a mixture of them, we're here now. We can't sort of undo anything, but what we can do is create conditions for the future. And that's all I would sort of worry about, in a sense. is what we're doing is we're seeing that this is the law of karma is a natural law, just like those other three before it, and we'll come on to dharma in a minute, and we make intelligent use of that. And we've already seen that, like I've seen it from the little groups we've been in, we've seen that if we act in a friendly way, even if that is counterintuitive, actually we experience more openness of being. It's positive, it's pleasant. And not only that, it creates a better world for ourselves and other people. And not only that, it makes it more likely that we'll act in that way in the future. Yeah. So I wouldn't concern myself too much on why we're experiencing what we're experiencing. I gave that as an example, but that was more just to show us that we can never tell. We can't be sort of fatalistic about karma. We can't really say that's their karma, It's definitely not reward and punishment, but it's a natural law that we can use intelligently. And that's what we've been doing. Especially with our practice on this course so far. Yeah. Yes, Claire.
I just wondered if you would say something about how actions are also, there's also our mind and our thinking patterns that are part of action. Because I think we tend to focus quite strongly on things we're doing.
Yeah.
But actually it's sometimes quite helpful to think on, focus on what we're thinking.
Yeah.
Because actually that is an action itself.
Yeah, it is. So I think especially when we're, examples like I've given, like if we habitually like rehearse arguments in our mind, that will have an effect on us. Or habitually, what else? That's the one I do most often. That's why it's come into my mind. But if we go over and over things we're anxious about, it's like it cuts a groove in our mind. So as soon as we start working something up, it's an action. Some things I want to make a distinction here between things that just enter our mind in a flash, like, that first flash of irritation isn't a karmic thing. It's just, that's a result of just all our previous conditioning. It becomes an action if I start working it up, if I start going over and over it. So I want to say that because I don't want us to get then hung up about every content of our mind. Like some things just pop into our mind, even outrageous things. Don't worry about that. If things just that sort of, something completely taboo or completely outrageous just kind of pops into your mind when you're meditating, or just pops into your mind when you're going about your business. It only becomes an action if you sort of actually start working it up, which includes it would include indulging. It also includes if you start thinking to yourself, oh my God, I'm a terrible person, I can't believe I just did that thought, then that becomes the thing. The thought itself isn't the thing, that then becomes the thing. That if you start scolding yourself, that will have an effect on your being. Yeah, just as if you were scolding a little child or a friend of yours or something. Even if it stays within your mind, it will have an effect, yeah? You can see that, can't you? And that's why in meditation, we're trying to actively do the opposite, yeah? We're trying to come back to our body, we're trying to protect our mind by not getting into prapancha, by coming back to our physical sense. And then the new thing we've been teaching of bringing a friend to mind and just kind of nudging our thoughts in the direction of well-wishing. That's having the positive effect, and also it's protecting against the negative effect. So actions are actions of mind as well. Yeah. Okay. So let's just check So I'm going to move us on. what I want to move us on to is just a little bit on this, what we're calling Dharma Niyama processes. So these really, it's a bit more difficult to talk about these directly, but these Dharma Niyama processes, again, natural laws of the universe, come into play when we start to, it's when, well, let's say, maybe I'll say it in a different way. Usually our ordinary mind is always circling back on itself. Ordinary consciousness, no matter how refined, no matter how generous we are, no matter how kind we are, always circles back to itself. It always circles back to, more and more I've been thinking, it circles back in three ways. That we'll always find ourselves sooner or later thinking, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? No matter how kind of kind we are, we'll find there will always be a little trace of, what am I going to get back, you know? Sometimes we don't notice that until we don't get the thing, you know. We can, do you know that way? You can think, oh, I'm being completely generous here. I've thought of this most wonderful birthday present for my friend. And then you give it to them and they don't really say thanks, or they don't say it as much as you think they should say it. That's a little clue. So you don't beat yourself up about that, but that's a little clue to that you've circled back to yourself. Yeah, it's not bad to do that. It's just in the nature of being human. But we will do that. We'll think, what's in it for me? Or we'll think, why is this happening to me? Yeah. So that's the other way we do it. We can do that. We'll do that with the more difficult experiences of life. We'll we'll think, why did this happen? We'll take things personally. Yeah. Even people, we can even do that with, quite, like the weather, for example. We think, oh, why does it always rain when I go on holiday? Why is this happening? Like I've had a sore back the past few days, and I can catch myself thinking, oh, like, why is this happening now? You know, why is this happening to me? You know, why does this? What's in this for me? Why is this happening to me? Or what are people thinking about me? Yeah, what are people thinking about me? It's a sort of form of pride, though it can be inverted pride. We're concerned with how we're coming across. Yeah, what are people thinking about me? Again, sometimes we feel that quite kind of grossly, but sometimes even again when we're feeling quite altruistic, we're feeling maybe we're being very generous, but at the back of it there's like, oh, am I good? You know, am I being really good? Yeah, do people? So it can come in quite subtly. And do people recognise those three things? Yeah. I thought it wasn't just me. No, yeah. Good. So that's what I mean when we're always circling back to ourselves. The Buddha, an enlightened being, has released themselves from that. So they've completely, there's a complete release of that. They're no longer circling back in that way. So Dharma Niyama processes come into play when we've left our attachment to self behind. By attachment to self, I mean that circling back to ourselves, yeah? So we leave our attachment to self behind, and we call this spiritual death. This is spiritual death. It's not literal death. What we're letting go of, we're letting go of limitations. And as we begin to let go of me, I say we say limitations as if it's something else, but actually it's me. It's this circling back to me that we're letting go of. And then this new kind of conditioning, if we can even call it that, arises. And we can feel it, and this is Dharma Niyama processes coming into being. It's like something that, it's when we experience something that can't quite be accounted for. they're not willed. I usually talk about them when I'm trying to describe them. Often we can feel it. The closest relation to it is when we, often in the artistic process, like if we've ever tried to paint something, not that I paint, but I do try and write poems, and every now and then you get, it sort of works, you're sort of in a flow, you've been trying to write something, and then it seems to write itself, you get this little moment of, it feels like grace, suddenly the poem seems to have written itself. I mean, obviously you have written it, it's your pen on the paper, it's your mind that started it off, but it seems to write itself from its own end. Do people know that? It might not be in poetry, it might be in another art form. Sometimes it happens in communication. Again, I've had that. Suddenly the right words seem to come into your mouth. Maybe you're in a difficult situation, or maybe someone's really needing you or really needing comfort, for example, and you kind of think, oh my goodness, what shall I do here? But suddenly it's as if the right words just come. It feels like they've come from somewhere else. The experience of Dharma Niyama process is it feels like it comes from somewhere else. That's what it feels like. Don't take that literally, because in a sense don't take that somewhere else literally, but that's the experience of how it feels, and it's tangible and it has an effect. Have people got a sort of sense of that? What I want to say is we probably all had glimpses of it in the examples I've shown, maybe sometimes as well looking at something very, very beautiful, either the beauty of nature or artistic beauty. It can feel, again, it's like feeling that something comes alive from its own end, but you're both completely present, and there's a sort of positive self-forgetting. There's temporarily we're released from that's what's in it for me, why is this happening to me, what do people think of me. We're released from a moment or two of that, and it's quite, it's freeing and it's quite blissful, that moment of being released from that. Again, have people had a sort of glimpse of that, of being released at least from a moment or two of that. So you could say that's a glimpse of these processes we're calling Dharma Niyama processes. And you have to sort of die to your old self for that to happen. It's not a literal death, because what you're dying to is, in a certain sense, something that was never there in the first place. I was thinking about this afternoon. I was thinking of one of my strongest experiences of this was I was meditating. It doesn't have to happen in meditation, but I happened to be meditating. I was just following my breath in meditation. And then I asked myself this question. I said to myself, what would happen if I wasn't so attached to my breath? And as I asked myself this question, I nearly burst out laughing, because I realised that nothing would happen, in the sense that I wouldn't stop breathing. If I wasn't attached to my breath wouldn't suddenly stop. My breath would just still breathe itself, but I would be completely free. There was a sort of moment of feeling the energy that would be released if I wasn't attached to this thing I call my breath, which isn't even mine anyway, it's just air moving in and out. But I call it my breath, and I'm attached to it. But for a moment I realised I didn't have to be attached to it. I wouldn't suddenly drop dead. It would still happen, but all that energy that I put into being attached to it, that I didn't even realise I was doing. See, that's the thing, you don't realise you're doing it. I didn't realise I was attached to it until I, for a moment, experienced that. Now, the funny thing is, I've asked myself that question again, and it hasn't had the same effect. You you can't will that experience into being. But you can try and create the conditions for it to arise. My poetry teacher, who I really look up to as a poet herself, she talks about how when she sits to write a poem, she just clears the space. She says that she tidies her whole room, and then she says then she sits down and she just waits. Yeah, so it's that waiting in the clear room that's creating the conditions. She can't then force the poem to come, but the waiting is creating the best condition for the poem to arise. And you can't say where it arises from. So there is a letting go, but it's not annihilation. Yeah. So when I let go temporarily of my attachment to my breath, I wasn't annihilated. My breath didn't stop. I didn't actually die. In fact, the opposite. I felt more alive than I felt, that I usually feel. At the same time, there is a kind of death because you have to be prepared to let go. We're so attached to our attachments, aren't we? Even our painful habits, we don't want to let go of them. I remember a very strong experience of this myself. It's funny, isn't it, with strong experiences? You always remember exactly where you were. I remember this exactly happening in my bedsit in Dublin when I lived in Dublin. And I had been really saying to myself, so Madhumati, you've got to learn to stop being such an irritable person. It's been my lifelong work so far to try and learn this. It's slightly got better, I think. And I was really going. I think on this occasion I'd really hurt somebody by being so irritable. And I said, you've got to keep this in check. And I suddenly realised I don't want to stop being an irritable person, because I thought, what will be left? There'll be nothing left. When I imagined myself without this irritation, I imagined this sort of ghostly, sort of grey, sort of wraith-like creature. And I realised I'm so identified with it that if it's not there, what will there be? There'll be nothing. And so I had to have some sort of faith that something new would come into being if I let it go. And that required a leap of faith, because I'd so identified with it, and so it seemed so much the whole of me that I didn't know what would be left. So I had to realize, no, you've just got to let it go and see what arises. Of course, something did arise that was much more positive. It was more subtle, but more positive. But that needed a leap of faith, yeah? So you can't will these dharma niyama processes into being. All we can do is create the conditions. There needs to be some sort of faith that there is something more to life, that there is something that will come into being if you spiritually die. That sounds so highfalutin, doesn't it? If you let go of the familiar, you can't let go of the familiar without some sort of faith that there'll be something more. Otherwise it would just be nihilism. It would just be annihilation. At the same time, they're not willed. So do you see how these two work together, this karma and dharma niyama process? You use the karma niyama processes to set up the conditions for something new to arise. At the same time, you have to have faith in the dharma niyama processes in order to let go enough, and for it not just to be nihilism or to think you're going to be annihilated. So there's a complete interplay between these. And between these whole five, what the insight of the Buddha was, that these five laws, these five niyamas, are everything, that that's all there is. And that everything arises and passes in dependence on conditions, that there are no fixed, unchanging things, including oneself. All there is this patterning. That's all there is this patterning. These first three more sort of scientifically governed natures of patterning, and then the karma and the dharma niyama, which are working together. And that's all there is. Everything is arising and passing away in dependence on these conditions, in dependence on this patterning. And the thing about the karma niyama is we can influence it. We can intelligently influence it. Okay, so you can see that moving on to this week, we're moving into areas that are a bit more complex and are going to require a bit more from us. So I do really encourage you to read this chapter 5. As I say, even if you're a bit behind, go on to chapter 5. The ideal would be if you could even read chapter 6 before you come next week, but at the minimum read chapter 5. And then what your homework is going to be is two things. So one is to now really commit to meditation practice. So you could say also that spiritual death is the stage of commitment, yeah? So commit to just meditate every day, yeah? And commit to creating the conditions to do that. So think of a time that you might do it. It might be the same time every day or a different time. Think of a place where you might meditate. You might already have done that, but set up a corner of your house or your room that's going to make you want to meditate there. So that's the first homework, is really now we want to start having a daily meditation practice, even if it's quite short. So 10 minutes every day is definitely better than 2 hours once a week. The regularity of it is important. I always remember when I was a little girl, I hated having my hair washed, and I think I had to get it washed every night. I don't know why, but anyway, I remember saying to my mum, "Oh, can I not have all my hair washes all in 1 week instead of having to have it every day?" So meditations like that, of course, she said, "No, that won't work." And meditation's the same. It's much better to have your 10 or 15 or 20 minutes a day than do a big chunk on a Sunday or something. So have a regular meditation practice. And then the homework is to try and every day consciously be less selfish. It's a sort of extension of the friendliness, but I think it's a bit subtly different in that it's actually doing something unselfish every day. It's actually putting someone first every day and consciously doing that. And it's putting, as long as it's not a moral issue, it's consciously putting your own needs aside. It's letting, if you're trying with a friend to decide which movies you're going to see, let her decide. Just consciously think, I'll give you the choice. Yeah, it's not being a doormat because it's conscious. Yeah, you're consciously saying, I'll let you choose. Yeah. Hopefully you've got a friend that's not going to say, no, you choose, but, it's consciously. I liked when people have been talking about it's an act of kindness to listen to someone, so consciously listen, consciously do something unselfish every day, and meditate every day. And you can keep up the other practices, especially the gratitude journal, which I know has meant a lot to people. So, we're just about at time. As a matter of fact, we're at time, but it's always nice to finish with just a little moment. So if you can stay 1 more minute or 2, we can just sit quietly.